So the focus of the webinar today is about competence by design, the Royal College's vision for competency-based medical education for both residency education and continuing professional development, and more specifically how this is being thought about from an ePortfolio perspective. Before we start, and I think because in part this is, you can get credits for this in the maintenance certification program, I thought I'd better share my conflict of interest declaration for you to review. So I am a full-time director of continuing professional development at the Royal College, but the rest of it is really not relevant, I think, in any specific way to the content for today. So these were some of the objectives I thought might be useful to you, and I thought we would first begin. The first bit would be to find what are the key functions of an ePortfolio, how ePortfolios are being thought about within the overall Competence by Design initiative, and then spend a bit more time on some of the anticipated benefits that we hope will be realized from the shift to a competency-based medical education model from an ePortfolio perspective for residents, for clinical faculty who may be assuming the role as a clinical supervisor and involved in assessment of residents within the workplace, program directors and program administrators. We're still in a pretty early stage of the design and development of this project, and I wanted to end by at least identifying for you what the project timelines are. But we've made a small beginning, and I will be able to show you a few cat screens, not because they will necessarily be reflective of what we're absolutely going to implement from a design perspective, but because it might give you a bit of an image of how some of the concepts I'll be talking about can give you a sort of a picture of what it might look like, so that you have maybe a greater understanding of it. Okay, so first of all, what is an ePortfolio? This is an idea that doesn't always conjure up a common set of ideas, and so this is a definition that I have been using, because we've had an ePortfolio at the Royal College since certainly 2001, and one could argue back into the mid-1990s. And so this is a definition by Sutherland in 2007, and it's particularly important for an ePortfolio as opposed to a paper-based portfolio, and she defined it as a purposeful aggregation of digital items. So it could be ideas, it's evidence, it could be reflections on experience, or feedback that one has received, which presents an individual to a specific audience and is a reflection of both their learning, their professional development, and or their ability. So there have been a number of different types of ePortfolios that have been designed. This is Eric Driesen's work from Maastricht in the Netherlands around a taxonomy of portfolios that he published several years ago. So there have been many that have been created with different functions and for different purposes. There are some that are more purely assessment portfolios designed around achieving objectives or getting feedback on specific assessment tools. The old idea of showcase portfolios more in visual arts or architecture, an ability to display one's best work, and for medical education it's been more about a record of their personal development and achievement over time, sort of what we would have said is like a virtual CV. There have been more purely developmental portfolios where an individual is using it primarily to track their own learning and development plans. And then the one that I've been using at the undergraduate curriculum here in Ottawa, I would say is more of a pure reflective portfolio where students are asked to reflect on their experiences based on their rotations or clinical activities or critical incidents, and they reflect on and say, what have I learned from that, and how is that helping me achieve the curricular objective? So something that's purely about reflection itself. This taxonomy is kind of important for historical reasons, because in my reading and review, most people are not developing a portfolio specifically for one of these functions, but are integrating many different functions across these types of portfolios based on the specific purpose for which the portfolio is designed to support. So here are some of the key functionalities then that I think portfolios have been more uniquely designed to develop. So to capture or store evidence, certainly they've been important on reflection and how to support reflection in the moment, or what others have called in action, or after an experience where they're reflecting on what it meant to them or what they learned from it. Certainly portfolios can support assessment, both the formative side of giving and receiving feedback, and more evaluation of achievement, which will be important, I think, for competency-based residency education programs in the new design. But also for individual or learners or programs to help with planning and goal setting. So individuals can use an ePortfolio to set some personal goals, or to respond to and use programmatic goals as sort of a guide to their own learning. And more laterally, we hope that ePortfolio, at least in the next few years, will help to think about how an individual learner's thoughts and ideas, their outcomes can be shared with and contributed to by their peers, or in the healthcare setting across interprofessional teams or even communities of practice. And because that kind of data is in ePortfolio, it will enable it to then to create some reports that will be able to report out to specific audiences. So in the continuing professional development world, as an example, ePortfolio can be helpful in reporting back to departments, faculties, hospitals for privileging, and even regulatory authorities for licensure purposes. So these are technological tools that have some potential advantages, and I emphasize the potential here. They have the ability, I think, to meet not only the needs of individual learners, but programs or an entire system, because they are simply adaptable to purpose. They can be designed to fit multiple goals, and at the individual level, they can be personalized to make them sort of unique to the individual learner's approach to learning and the resources that they regularly use. The other advantage of them is that they can integrate with and across a lot of IT platforms, and that's going to be important because we realized from the beginning that there are a number of platforms that are currently in use across the faculties of medicine to support residency training, and an ePortfolio at the Royal College level would have to be designed to enable and facilitate data exchange and the access to other assessment tools or assessment data that may be stored there. So it can be certainly bi-directional as well as unidirectional, and it can provide for learners access to resources, scientific data that they may be using and accessing on a regular basis. The other is they can capture learning and personal development, over time or in time, and because we've aligned smartphones and tablets through app development to this, the access to the ePortfolio could be done not just with personal computers or laptops, but with other devices that are interfaced well within the workplace and are often part of what the learners are using, both to manage their clinical care as well as their lifelong learning. And because they're kind of neutral to context or specialty or location of practice, they're adaptable to any type of learner, no matter what training program they're in, and whether they're learning across their clinical practice dimension or other dimensions such as teaching, research, or administration. Portfolios have been, specifically for undergraduate and postgraduate medical education, have been the focus of an underlying best evidence medical education guide. The one in undergraduate education was in 2009. You can see that it had some positive impact on student learning, and there was, the bottom of the slide lists the success drivers. I would note that only 3, though, of these 18 studies in medicine were electronic portfolios. The same year, the same sort of approach of looking at portfolios in residency training. Same year, Here, good evidence again that they can be effective and practical if they're implemented well. And the one interesting thing about this study was that it did increase the learner's responsibility for their own learning, which would be consistent, I think, with the literature on medical education, that teachers teach and learners learn, and supports them in thinking about professional development right from the beginning of training program, not just when they enter practice and are doing this a little bit more on their own. And the key here in this study was around regular feedback is being provided, and that's a key part of the design around formative assessment as a program of assessment where ePortfolios are regularly assessing and providing feedback to learners so they can use that feedback to support their learning and to guide their achievement of the curricular objectives. So as we've been thinking about ePortfolio development, these are the factors that we think will influence success. We have to have clarity on purpose and goals. It has to be easy to use. I think there's a degree of structure that's an enabler, but over-structuring can be a deterrent. There has to be significant support strategies and feedback, either from peers or coaches or mentors. And for us, integrating this across a Canadian context, we can't do this without some kind of thoughtful decisions around how we're going to work as a collaboratively together around data exchange, how we're going to support automation, and that we have the ability for learners to take a basic framework and personalize it so that the report out ability is tailored to specific audiences. So from a point of view of the Royal College's sort of competence by design and ePortfolio, we thought was a tool that would help learning and assessment across the continuum. It will help us, I think, to achieve some of the important educational outcomes that we've been seeking, but also, I think, as we get more into the practice world, help us around achievement of important clinical outcomes as we focus on the very competencies that support the delivery of effective healthcare. And because it has these multiple functions, promoting lifelong learning, reflection and feedback, professional development and assessment, that they are tools that will be useful to education, not only in training programs but in practice. So that's a very quick cursory view of sort of some of the literature on ePortfolios, sort of what they are, how they have been used or can be used. I'm just going to pause and see if there's any specific questions that people have about any of that so far. All right, well, there was one question about, will the faculties with existing portfolios be expected to implement the Royal College's version? I think the answer to that is that, there are lots of tools and resources that are currently in place, and a lot of those will continue to be relevant and will continue to be used within existing systems. I think the Royal College's ePortfolio will be a repository for more around the achievement of the defined EPAs or milestones that have been created by the specialty committee, and will serve as a national database where programs and program directors can look at the data of an individual resident in comparison to their peers and look at how their programs are doing across the nation. So there was a question about whether or not, how much flexibility is there for program level changes to the portfolio, adding fields, changing, tracking intervals, etc. I think that's a great question, and I mean there is flexibility, but I think the flexibility will be more not at the initial program level, but more at the specialty level, so that the specialties are really defining sort of what the curricular objectives are going to be, and both for what the learners will have to acquire and demonstrate that they've acquired. A lot of that will be based on EPAs, but I think the flexibility is we want programs to still be innovative and to contribute to the national strategies for how we can best do that, and there will certainly be a lot of innovation on the educational side. So I think if we're changing it, we're going to not change it by program, but more at specialty by specialty. So the next question was around, will the college publish an open API to facilitate other groups transferring data with minimal fuss for users? I've actually had to learn what APIs are, and absolutely, I think there's going to be, this has to be a seamless integration. The standards that, and there's a working group that's made up of a number of the faculties of medicine who've been working on automation and data exchange. They've just gotten going with some of the ideas about the kind of data that could be transferred, where data would be best housed. We think we'll likely use the ubiquitous standards as a starting point, at least for exploring the most appropriate data exchange for the type of data that will likely be transferred, and APIs will certainly be used, and we use them today around how data is exchanged between MAINPORT and the Royal College's membership database now. So we have a lot of experience with that, and it works on a seamless basis. So I think we'll certainly have the ability for minimal fuss. The second part was allowing for innovation with alternative interfaces that might be more appealing to niche groups. I think we should be open to exploring any ideas like that. I haven't got a clear idea of exactly what an alternative interface would be, but certainly because there may be some customization, of MAINPORT, for either an individual learner or an individual types of learners, we could certainly be open to customizing the dashboard that a user would use or a clinical supervisor would use. Again, I think, in the early stages, we will probably have, a fairly common framework and use iterative testing and a lot of feedback loops to generate a lot of ideas about how we can make this more adaptable and more relevant to individual contexts. Another question about, will this be online form based, or will the residents be able to upload files like an MS Word document? What I'm going to show you down in a few minutes is as an approach to how a milestone could be demonstrated to be met through uploading of artifacts, which in the e-diploma programs, that's done largely by the residents themselves. I think for most of what we are thinking about, at least at this stage of our development, and as we reflect it to programs and program directors and deans, is to think that a lot of this will be based on some national templates that will be seamless between a clinical supervisor and MAINPORT without the need to upload much information other than what the template would be assessing directly. Great questions. ePortfolio is another question about becoming a bit of a fad with health authorities and even governments pushing these for a variety of certification purposes. Yeah, it's a bit of a zoo for users. I suspect it certainly can be. Will the college be attentive to the possibility that members may not have space for yet another portfolio? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's we don't want to have a significant overlap between or duplication of services or functions that are currently working well. If data is stored in those and it's deemed to be important to have that within the national ePortfolio, then automation data exchange should enable that with seamlessness, and so there wouldn't be a problem. So I think the automation and data exchange working group has been working through the idea that the national sort of templates that judge, the achievement of a specific EPA or an independent milestone, depending on the context, that those would naturally belong within the Royal College's ePortfolio. But many of the assessment strategies, the ongoing day-to-day, for instance, clinical encounter cards, and other day-to-day assessments that go on, in emergency rooms, ICUs, and other settings, that would most naturally belong and should remain within the local program. So it's not it's not intended to be a duplication or a takeover in any sense, but really an augmentation of current practices around specially specific training objectives which are being now constructed around observable behaviors that are reflected in milestones and EPAs. Great, fantastic. I appreciate those questions. Keep them coming, and I think your questions are really helpful to us and me in particular as we think about how you're viewing this, so that we make sure that we're communicating properly and consulting on the right things. All right, so what about ePortfolio within competence by design? That was sort of an overarching kind of view of ePortfolio. So this was one of the early diagrams that was created around, if we're going to shift to a competency-based medical education model, we needed a competency framework, and Campbell's 2015 is certainly that framework. But an ePortfolio, which we've had for the support of CPD and fellows of the Royal College, we needed to extend that back to the beginning of residency so that we can support a seamless sort of continuation of a competency-based model right from the beginning of residency until retirement. And we need to do so within an integrated platform that includes many of the existing systems that we have today. And we need to make sure that we are using it in a regular piloting and iterative way. But I think the idea of this slide is also important to say it's not just about learning and assessments within a training program or in practice, but the idea of CBD and having an ePortfolio and a competency framework will actually begin to re-engineer how we think about credentialing and accreditation and the role the college can play in terms of some support of faculty development and how we're rethinking assessment from a more programmatic point of view, where day-to-day assessments within the workplace and the exam are part of an overall program of assessment and are not two separate ideas that are unrelated to each other. So when we thought about ePortfolios, just trying to get the slide to advance here, these were the kind of I thought about competency-based medical education. These were the kinds of general functions we thought were important to start with. So we needed some way to help our individual residents and our practicing fellows to set goals and monitor their achievement of them, to plan and reflect on what activities that they've entered into, either group learning, self-learning, or assessment, that there would be a way to support assessment, both not just self-assessment but external assessment, that the data would then be an expression of one's professional development and would help report out, so you're documenting once for multiple purposes, and eventually, and more laterally in the ePortfolio project, to think about how individual learners and team-based learning can be interfaced in some appropriate way. And those functions will be applicable to every stage of training, starting from entry into the transition to discipline stage throughout the next 3 stages of residency training, the last of which being transition to practice, but we'll then just simply keep going as a framework for how to think about maintaining competence and advancing one's expertise aligned to your scope of practice, and finally as one transitions out of professional practice into retirement. So those functions should be relevant and useful to a learner regardless of the stage that they are in. I think one of the things that came from the incoming chair of the specialty committee in otolaryngology, one of the first of 2 disciplines that will start in cohort 1 to implement their competency-based medical education model in July of next year, it was a quote from Wayne Matthews that we need a system that's simple and easy to use, that has a straightforward workflow, and allows us to access and input assessment and evaluation information. And I picked the things that I thought were important: simple and easy, straightforward and easy. And I would say amen to all of those ideas. So that's our goal, is to make it. That's sort of, I think, a metric for how well we're doing if it meets those criteria. So to expand MAINPORT ePortfolio to support competency-based medical education and including residency training, we created this ePortfolio project. And it had a specific vision around supporting learning assessment and CPD across the lifelong learning continuum. And it kind of looks like this on an annual sort of fiscal basis at the college. So, there is, every year we have a project to enhance the current MAINPORT functions that we receive on the basis of fellows' feedback. but we sort of had a 5-year focus. In the first year, and I'll show you some of that work, was around transitioning MAINPORT to support e-diploma programs, which are competency-based. Where we are at the beginning of this fiscal year is how are we going to take CanMeds 2015 and integrate it as the first 2 specialties in cohort 1, translate the generic framework into specialty-specific milestones and EPAs. How does MAINPORT support, the demonstrated achievement again across those 4 stages of training? The development and piloting of an e-log, and the rest are for years to come. So we are here around, we've been at e-diploma now for almost 18 months or so, and we certainly have started to shift and plan for CanMeds 2015 integration, which is foundational to the launch for cohort 1. So we're expanding our ePortfolio functions to enable learning and achievement assessment of the milestones, EPAs of the specialty committees, which include all of the program directors through the workshops that Jolanta Karpinski and others are framing specialty by specialty. They will need to enable decisions around how residents are progressing against the EPAs and milestones that are specifically defined for each stage. And it will create a number of views of the data. Certainly the individual can see how they're doing and plan how they are they're learning against achievement of stage by stage EPAs and milestones. But it also will provide an individual program view for the program directors and competency committees and the program administrators around how individual residents are doing collectively within their training programs, and hopefully over time that we should have a national program view, so one program can look how well they're doing against specific stage competencies or EPAs in relationship to other national programs of the same specialty. And for the CPD world, things like communities of practice and how we could align individuals with a specific scope of practice against others who are similar to that, how they're using a more national MOC framework is sort of the comparable. Again, I wanted to emphasize the reporting of data from multiple sites or sources. We need to enable that in a way we've already talked a little bit about, and I'm sorry for the repetition here a bit, but I think it's important to emphasize that without data exchange and automation, that we're not going to have a very successful launch of ePortfolio. And so it's our sincere intent to work collaboratively with all of the faculties of medicine to ensure our plans will be well integrated, and it may not be in exactly the same manner with the current IT systems that support residency training today. And we've been very explicit about the importance of protection of privacy and confidentiality. So we've tried to create 2 layers with the expanded MAINPORT. One I've called a personal layer, where any resident who is using MAINPORT in their residency training program, whether it's in a competency-based model or because they're simply a resident affiliate of the college, that they can tag any activity as either to be shared or not shareable. And if it's not shareable, it's just for their personal use. But anything that they want to share or elect to share, or any other data that is brought in from external places for the purposes of reporting or giving feedback or providing assessment data, that would be in the shared layer. And ultimately, although this isn't true today, we'd like to have a de-identified layer that would help support scholarship and research in the future. So the first step along this pathway was the e-diploma program. And e-diplomas they're not specialties or subspecialties. They're areas of focused competence that are important domains but don't meet our definitions of specialty or subspecialty. They are all competency-based. There is no exam for e-diploma programs, and their entire achievement of what initially was called key portfolio outcomes, which we think are really akin to milestones, was completely based on the use of an ePortfolio, and they have been embedded in MAINPORT now for over a year. So this enabled us to create the first iteration of workflows. revised the early revisions to our credentialing process and has given the faculty of who are part of these diploma programs to be able to provide feedback directly to residents on their achievement and make judgments of that. So we've started with it with transfusion medicine. Cytopathology has been added, and there's many other programs that are in either various stages of approval or in the final stages of implementation. So we should see this grow significantly in the next couple of years. So if you're an AFC trainee in a diploma program, you would sign on to MAINPORT, and because at single sign-on, MAINPORT knows you're an AFC trainee in a particular diploma program, you see this tab that's highlighted in kind of blue with white letters called My Diploma. I don't know if you can see the mouse. I hope you can. I'm circling that. Where, when I sign on to MAINPORT, because I'm not a trainee and nor am I a clinical supervisor in any of these programs, that's not a tab that I see in MAINPORT today. And it shows this is fictional data around that this person is at the University of Toronto in transfusion medicine, who is still at the clinical supervisor stage of getting all of his or her milestones reviewed, and you can see that they have met 14 of the mythical 24, and they can see which milestones that they have yet to focus on or upload evidence for, the status, clinical supervisor, etc. Now, if the trainee wants to know, here's one on advising on the quality of manufactured blood products and components. I think that's a real milestone for transfusion medicine. Here's the evidence that it had to have been acquired, so that one can see and whether or not what they have submitted. And once they've submitted it, they can link it to a clinical supervisor and request a review of that to see if they've achieved what the program would want them to achieve. So that's again an image of how one way in which milestones can be presented and where evidence can be uploaded. I don't think our view of how ePortfolio will work for residency training in cohort 1 is exactly will be at this, but I've just thought that might be a useful image for you. And these are some of the expanded functions that we're still working on for programs that have requested the need for procedural case logs. I think we'll have more tools to support reflection within MAINPORT. We'll certainly need a personal learning plan tool, and we're always working on access to resources and the possibility of integrating discussion forums, etc. And I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any specific questions around ePortfolio as part of competence by design. So one of the questions was around the security of MAINPORT ePortfolio, and certainly security has been a huge issue for me as we've been sort of doing ePortfolio development now for almost 15 years. So we have a large commitment to making sure that not only is the system secure and access is controlled through multiple levers, but any data that's transmitted to MAINPORT travels in an encrypted way so that it doesn't fall prey to the internet and other unwarranted or unmerited access to that. Question in terms of what does the near future mean? Near future in terms of, can you describe that in a bit more detail? Oh, in terms of 1 year versus 10 years, in terms of when we're ready to launch. Yeah, I think that the goal is, and it won't be the Cadillac version, I don't think, of ePortfolio, but will be an ePortfolio that will support all of the key functions to implement a competency-based model. Will be ready for July 1st, 2016. I'll show the timelines of where we are near the end of this webinar. Thanks for that. I've thought about, some of the potential either implications or opportunities, potential benefits for residents, supervisors, program directors, or administrators. And here's, and I appreciate your feedback on whether these resonate with you, but so part of my sort of views around why is ePortfolio an important tool for residents stems back from some early work that we did on creating a lifelong learning curriculum that would be applicable both for residents and for practicing physicians. And one of the ideas in the lifelong learning curriculum was the ability to actually establish a personal self-learning management system, so that the residents have a degree of responsibility and have to acquire certain skills and abilities to manage lifelong learning throughout both their training and into practice. And so the ePortfolio for residents will give them the ability to develop and revise a learning plan. They can set goals. They can track their achievement of those goals. They'll participate in lots of different types of learning activities and therefore can reflect on and document what they learned from it or what outcomes they realize from engagement in learning activities. They can certainly receive feedback from their peers or supervisors, and they can monitor their progress in a competency-based curriculum, because they'll know exactly what milestones or EPAs they have to achieve stage by stage. It's not going to be a surprise to them, and they'll be able to align learning activities and to ensure that they are addressing what is required. And they have again the ability to personalize those resources. So here's an example of where a resident may actually raise a clinical question linked to a patient interaction on a ward or an ambulatory care clinic, recorded in terms of a personal learning project, define what they learned from it. They can link the resources that they have used to learn. They can anchor it against one or more of the CanMeds roles, and hopefully as we get further along in MAINPORT enhancements, that they will be able to hopefully link it specifically to a particular EPA or milestone that they think this learning is particularly relevant to. And if they wish, they can certainly upload documents that would be important as a support tool for that specific learning. They can, in MAINPORT today, create a goal, and they can sort of define what the goal is, how they want to go about accomplishing it, the date they'd like to complete it, and they can list the type of goal. And right now there are approximately 5 types. So this could be a knowledge goal, a performance skills, system improvement, or health outcomes goal. And that may be an absolute expression of their personal learning plan, even within competence-based medical education. And of course, they can use all of the things that they can use using a laptop. They can use a smartphone. Here's the slide menu for the new MAINPORT app that will be launched next month. So they can have access to all of the same tools at any time, no matter where they are in their workplace. And they can enter activities if they wish to reflect on what a conference meant to them, what a particular academic half day allowed them to learn about, or the questions that they would like to pursue as a result. And they can, if they have access to resources, or they have search engines that they like, or they have specific data sources that they consult on a regular basis, they can personalize any of those resources here and have that as a regular approach to searching for evidence when they are looking for information. From a clinical supervisor's view, again, our hope is that this will allow them to have access to tools that would support their many roles. We envision that a clinical supervisor, when they log on to MAINPORT, would have a tab that would launch their own landing page, where they would have access to specific EPAs or milestones by stage for their discipline. They can review any assignments of specific EPAs or milestones that have been assigned to them for specific residents within their workplace. They'll have hopefully the ability to review the assessments that they have done in the past that they've completed, and obviously they can access any of the assessment templates, whether local or national, either in MAINPORT or through a smartphone or a tablet. And then when they complete assessments, either based on assignment or because they, in working with a resident, decide that this half-day clinic or this particular patient that we're going to see would be great for us to sort of agree that this would be, I'm going to observe you do this as part of an EPA assessment, and then they can provide feedback in real time to the resident. And so the e-diplomas has a clinical supervisor dash page where they can see, what they are been asked to review and assess. They're reviewing and assessing objects that have been uploaded, which I think will be different in ePortfolio, but we've created a sort of a clinical supervisor page of people who have specific roles and responsibilities within teaching or assessment of milestones or EPAs within the e-diploma programs. And they can look and once they've reviewed that evidence, they can either mark it as achieved. I think likely they'll be using templates that are driven by the assessment processes that currently exist based on either national or local assessment tools. But you get it. Hopefully, you get an image that within this, that the supervisors will have their own dashboard, if you like, around how they can manage their roles and responsibilities that are assigned, or where they agree that with a resident that this would be a good time to complete one of the assessments of an EPA in that specific stage. For program directors, they will clearly have to have a dashboard that will be comprehensive. They'll be able to monitor the progress of not only an individual resident, but all the residents as they are progressing from stage to stage. They can certainly provide feedback and support. And they may be able to help residents with their learning plan based on how they're progressing. In fact, not just because they're progressing slowly, but even if they're progressing rapidly, they may actually adapt the learning plan to enable that resident to even have greater experiences within their training program. And clearly they can look and compare how their program is doing against other programs on measures that are defined by the specialty. And certainly, last but certainly not least, around program administrators. And this is an important area for us around and an active area for needs assessment. And we have a number of meetings with program administrators around what roles that we could enable within their particular work week. So whether it's in resident registration, the ability to have a module that they could use to push information to individual or all residents about what's going on in the training program. They may be able to assign clinical supervisors around EPAs that are allocated to specific either specific clinical supervisors or within specific rotations or clinics. They'll be able to pull reports based on the data that's in MAINPORT and obviously within their own system that will support the program director and the competency committee to make decisions, and clearly they have the ability to support residents. Now, those are some high-level ideas that we think would be important to think about and include. So we're going to pause and see if there's any questions. So one question is it up to an individual program to determine what assessment tools will be in place to check off competence in any particular area? I think, again, the assessment process is primarily a national assessment strategy that's the decisions of the specialty committee, and because those decisions around, for all the stages, the 4 stages of training, which EPAs and milestones for our discipline are going to be part of stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then what assessment strategies are going to be aligned with those specific EPAs, and there'll be more than one strategy depending on the nature of the EPA. Those will be based at the national level, and because those decisions are being made with every program director in the room. Every program will have the ability to participate in those discussions and helping to come to decisions. I'm concerned that this system will not be user-friendly for some residents and faculty. Has there been thought into making sure this system is user-friendly? Well, if you go back to Dr. Matthews' comment that it has to be easy to use, if it's not easy to use, it's not going to be a system that's going to be particularly embraced or endearing to anyone. So I think we have to make sure that it's easy to use, and the way in which we design and implement systems is through multiple iterative loops through a series of releases. So we will, as an example, build out some of the functions in a particular way. Once we've built those out, we send them out for feedback and through multiple iterative loops, including field testing, so that it's not like we're going to build the whole thing from beginning to end and then ask for feedback. We'll be doing that through a series of multiple loops. And so one of the things that I'm glad that so many people are on the call today is that as we begin to build and design, we'd like you to volunteer to test and give us feedback about what you see, how well it works, how comprehensive it is, how intuitive it is, so that we will be committed to that as the only way that we can do this on a national level. So, question about what if we already have an online system that already is in place for resident registration and evaluation? Can it be integrated with the Royal College ePortfolio? Yeah, and the answer is absolutely yes. That's what data exchange and automation is all about. I think what we're still working through, and it's early days in the discussions, is to make sure that the assessment tools that are being used are appropriate to and aligned with the specific EPAs by stage. So I think there's lots of ways which that can happen, and automation and data exchange can occur. There are many programs that we've heard from that don't have a lot of assessment approaches or don't have the same IT infrastructure support, and so are glad that there will be some kind of national tools available to them to help them make that transition. But where existing tools already exist and are part of a system, we'll do our very best to ensure that they are integrated, assuming that they're fit for purpose. So I'll deal with the so there's a couple of extra. How long is this documentation going to add to one's day, especially with all the questions asked about what you required from the reading of an individual paper? So the frequency of documentation, again, I think is it's going to be determined by specialty, but it's not likely to be a daily basis for sure. I think I don't know what the frequency will be, and it will probably be different across different specialties, but it's not going to be on a daily basis for sure. Each EPA will integrate a number of milestones, again, as determined by the specialty committee. Those should be observable, and whether you can observe them directly, as watching a resident do something in the same workflow that you're in today, or it may be using other sources of data, like chart data may be a part of that. For others, it might be multi-source feedback data or other forms of data. So I don't think it's, again, the documentation is not cannot be burdensome. It has to fit within workflow and has to fit within the practice lives of busy clinicians, but it will be certainly more explicit about making more targeted observations that are aligned with a specific EPA by stage. A sticky diary is one that is open, organic, and narrative. MAINPORT is cluttered with field bloat. Amen. Have you considered how to cut down discrete data demands? Yeah, the dashboard of MAINPORT today, I'm not happy with either. Thanks for that, and we are going to be redesigning that for sure. It's way too cluttered. You have to scroll. So we've got a lot of catching up to do in terms of making that a much more dynamic tool, where more of the information up front is much more usable. So we've got significant designs to enhance the initial landing page of MAINPORT. All right, we're just near the end, and we've just got 2 slides left around project timelines and opportunities for feedback. So this is sort of the basic timeline. We've been at the business requirements gathering stage for some time, working with specialty committees at the workshops of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and medical oncology. And obviously we started with cohort 2. Internal medicine had their workshop, their first workshop a few weeks ago. And we've been communicating obviously with postgraduate deans. So this has been going for a while, and we tried to commit to gathering as many business requirements as we could by the 30th of April, and that's been done. So that now is out for review in terms of a statement of work from our vendor, and we hope to begin the development phase in July, and we've allocated for the time being for most of the functions that are basic and required to launch a competency-based model for July 2016 by the end of this calendar year. But again, just to repeat, there will be multiple releases, lots of testing with feedback, and continual revisions through multiple iterative loops. Once we get to January, we're allocating 6 months for pilot testing to ensure some of the issues that you've all raised around how intuitive and how easy it is to use, or how, if it's onerous, how can it be less onerous. And again, our go live date is July 1st, 2016. So in addition to that, there are many, but I picked 2 working groups that are working on how automation data exchange can be seamlessly done. And one of the sort of early recommendations is to create sort of an advisory group of the IT groups across all of the faculties of medicine to ensure that that there's some direct dialogue and discussion with them directly about how automation and data exchange can work in the most applicable way. And I have a group on privacy and confidentiality that is working its way through that, and we'd like to run all of our approaches to privacy confidentiality through the legal councils of all the faculties of medicine. Right now it's at our own legal council for their initial review, but all legal councils will certainly have input into the approaches that we've done. So a key role of these working groups is to guide and enable system integration and ensure the appropriate safeguards for privacy and confidentiality. So you'll be hearing more about those as they go along. So again, I don't have anything specifically today to show you about ePortfolio other than to try and give you a bit of a vision of how we think it will work and interface with existing systems, and how it will support learning and assessment, and hopefully a whole series of functions from the beginning of training program until the end of practice. So there's a lot of resources around competency-based medical education, and specifically the Competency by Design program. So there's some information that might be useful to you. You can use it for Twitter or LinkedIn or email to give us to access and tell us how we can do better. And there's certainly a lot more information available to you on the website. And you can earn credits from today, either in section 1 or section 2. Was there any questions that people had? And I know we're just at time. So, well, thank you. So someone said, I believe the ePortfolio will be an amazing tool and help to bring all aspects of residence training to one place and provide for individual trainees, PAs, PDs, and programs across the country. I look forward to using it. Yeah, I mean, that would be, thank you for that. I think it's, that's our goal. It has to be useful, it has to be practical, it has to be amenable and integratable within current systems, and it has to be complementary to what's going on, and I hope it will be a useful tool that will start the process of learning across the continuum. There was a whole bunch of 47 sites or 48 sites out of that were joined, and probably more. I know there was more than one person at the site. So if you have any feedback about what you heard today, any additional ideas, cautions, concerns, worries about this, please do not hesitate.